Andrew, awesome. So excited to have you here. As the team introduced you, I thought, it's so cool to have really a TechToronto icon here on stage with us. And he went as far back as Top Hat. But I thought maybe you caught the technology bug a little earlier. Could you tell me when you first got involved and interested in technology?
Yeah, so I was like a gearhead in high school. I grew up in the Fast and Furious, age, and so I wanted to like build and design cars. I ended up studying engineering. I went to the University of Waterloo to do that, and I got my very first co-op job at GM in Oshawa, building trucks and cars and designing and programming robots. It was a really cool job. But I kind of looked at my boss, and his job was less interesting than mine. And then his boss's job was less interesting. And then the plant manager had like the worst job in the plant. And I was like, I love this robot stuff, but like this is not going to be for me.
So there's an alternate universe where you're a plant manager at GM today.
Yeah, exactly. It was so close.
So you thought you should try something else.
Yeah, so I tried a bunch of different things. I mean, this is the great thing about, Waterloo for anybody who went there was like you get to try a bunch of different things. And my last co-op term was actually around when I met you. So I did a co-op at Mckinsey, which was also pretty fun. The exact opposite. You weren't designing or building anything other than like PowerPoint presentations and Excel models. But you got to see sort of like how CEOs think and, the strategy and things like that. I spent a lot of time in media, a lot of time in financial services, and started to see how technology was flipping some of these industries on their head.
But you also didn't look at your manager and your manager's manager and the head of McKinsey Canada and say, geez, I want to be Dom one day.
I did not want to be Dominic Barton. No, I realized, at a certain point, I loved building, but I also liked the strategic side of things. And the only way to be able to combine those is just to be at a smaller company, right? And, be closer to the action and be able to influence both the direction of the company, but also get your hands dirty and like do shit. And so ended up meeting a guy named Chamath, who was head of growth at Facebook. He was leaving to start a venture fund called Social Capital, and he's a Canadian, Waterloo about 10 years before me, and convinced me to come down and join one of the companies that he had invested in, a recruiting company. And for me, it was just like, I could have done the McKinsey route, done an MBA, and like gotten a regular job, but figured it was like, hey, 1 year, move out to Silicon Valley, see what happens, and worst case scenario, like all of that path would still be there for me.
Well, worst case scenario, you threw great parties. I went to one of the top prospect parties, and it seems like you met a lot of interesting people out there.
Yeah, so we were probably one of the first companies backed by Andreessen Horowitz when they first started their fund. So we had a bunch of great investors. And I think one of the interesting things for me was over and over, like through my experience in Silicon Valley and after, I've sort of realized you kind of peel the curtain back behind what's like all the gloss in the press. So I met these guys. I met Stuart when he was building a company called TinySpec, which they ended up pivoting into Slack. And I met Mike and Kevin when they were building an app called Bourbon, and it wasn't working at all. And they ended up shutting it all down, relaunching it at Instagram, and like 8 months later selling it for like $1 billion. So you start to realize like there's all these people in all that you read about in TechCrunch and stuff, but actually, everybody's still just figuring it out. And they were no different than my friends coming out of Waterloo, starting companies, Ted at Kick and Mike at Welton. Actually, Mike, we got to know it at McKinsey together. I actually convinced him. I was like, look, I gave him the same pitch a year later. I was like, hey, just come out for a year. He had a job lined up on Bay Street, and I was like, just come out for a year. Your friends just got into Y Combinator, see what happens, and good things happen for him too.
So it seems like at the beginning of your career, you had a couple stops where maybe you weren't fully inspired. Throughout your journey, have there been any times where you thought, geez, I'm in the wrong role, or I've taken the wrong step on this path? Or has it been all bourbons and and Instagrams all the way down?
No, dude, it was so about a month in, moved down to San Francisco. I was like on a TN work visa, playing soccer on a weekend, tore my ACL, walked in on Monday, told my boss there were 5 people in the company. I was like, hey, I got to go in for surgery. I'm going to be out for a few days, but I'll be all right. He's like, oh, well, we have a board meeting in like 3 weeks, and we got to hit this target. We got to hit this like $1 million target, or, this is that I promised the board, or like, if you can't do it, you're basically fired and I'm going to find somebody else to do it. I was like, oh my God. I didn't know about this. I didn't even know what a board was. And so I was super terrified. So I remember like coming out of surgery, being like, give me a phone. Just somebody give me a phone. And I was just like pounding the phones, like making cold calls, trying to hit this number.
I mean, it was your ACL, not your voice or your mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just throw your foot up and pound, just don't take the medications and pound the phone. So that was my first experience being doing cold calls and realizing it's just like, it's kind of a numbers game. But it was, there were definitely moments where I was like, I'm going to get deported and I have no backup plan. Constantly sort of these moments of terror, but you realize like once you push through a couple of them,
Well, hopefully you're not scaring away some of the new Canadians that are here in the audience tonight.
Oh no, you guys will be fine. Yeah. Be fine. Just make some cold calls.
That's right.
That's the answer to
tear your ACL and make some cold calls.
Exactly.
So that was sort of maybe a low point. Tell me about looking back on that journey and maybe even where you are today. What's sort of the professional success that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I've had a lot of moments that have been, those highs and lows, right? And I think, spending time meeting those folks in Silicon Valley, joining the team at Top Hat, actually. So I got a chance to meet, I did some work with the Khan Academy, like a nonprofit education company. Loved what they were doing. My mom is a teacher. My grandfather was a teacher. Loved the impact of technology in the classroom, which is what led me to meet the guys at Top Hat. And so joining them, helping them raise a couple rounds of funding and seeing the impact that they were having was great. And then, moving back to Toronto was actually a great experience, seeing what was happening in the city. So I lived in San Francisco from 2010 to 2013 and moving back and seeing what's been going on in this ecosystem and watching some of these companies grow and getting a chance to be part of their story as an investor, advisor, and executive has been awesome.
So am I right to think that coming back to Toronto has been the biggest professional success that you've had in your career?
Yeah, I would like, this is true. It's like maybe
give this man a round of applause, huh? Pretty cool. Definitely knows his audience.
No, but like
he's going on stage in Berlin next month. He said the same thing. Coming to Berlin.
Coming to Berlin
highlight
was the best
of
thing
my career.
No, I honestly think there's like a moment in time that Toronto has been going through and is really starting to emerge out of, where we're on this amazing growth trajectory. We've got things that are unique about the talent ecosystem, the global access to talent. If you're trying to build a global company, this is probably the best place to build it. If you're trying to build on top of data science and artificial intelligence, this is probably the best place to do that. And for me, I mean, look, I was, everybody talks about like the big fish, small pond, conundrum. I always feel like if you can come in and be part of a growth story of an exciting company, which was Top Hat for me, and that ecosystem is growing, all of a sudden you're a big fish in a big pond. Like I would never be able to have the career that I've had if I was fighting my way up from the bottom in Silicon Valley, for example, because there just weren't those growth. The PayPal mafia has already got the whole place. Like,
they're going to put a hit out on you.
Yeah, exactly.
If you did anything to disrupt that.
Horsehead.
So you have a choice then to start Clearbanc in Toronto or in SF, right? What did you choose?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because technically we started in the Soho House of Toronto, which was where I took all of my meetings, and I probably picked Jason's brain all the time and came up with the initial concept. Then we started doing a bunch of pitch meetings. Michelle had just sold her last company to Groupon, so she was in Chicago. And so we were doing some pitches in Michelle's condo in Chicago, and then we got into Y Combinator. So we moved down to San Francisco, and that's when we officially incorporated. We started in SF, and pretty quickly realized we were just hiring Canadians that we had worked with before and moving them down to San Francisco. And we were all living in this house, this like expat Canadian house, and we were like running into visa problems again.
You had Molson on tap in the kitchen.
Exactly, we were importing Timbits, and that was really the biggest risk to the business there, the Timbit supply getting cut off. But we just realized, like, if we're gonna build this kind of company, and where we think we can get the best people for this company is Toronto, we should move the company back. And I think we have a unique opportunity to build a company. There's not many cities in the world like this, and there's certainly no other cities in the world where you can actually be a company that can attract kind of the group of talent. We've got a few Clearbankers in the audience. If you guys want to throw your hands up.
Yeah.
We've got a really interesting dynamic on the team, and I don't think we could replicate that anywhere else.
So, you've got a experience, obviously, pining to be a plant manager at General Motors as a management consultant at McKinsey. Then you've done ed tech. You've done hardware and security. Why start Clearbanc? Like, why that business?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things for me has always been how do we help people live the life they want, right? How do we help entrepreneurs and founders, people that want to be self-employed, freelancers? The whole idea was, and this was even in like my recruiting startup and education, how do you help people sort of align to their perfect version of themselves, where they can just focus on knocking it out of the park and removing all the barriers from that. And so, my role when I was at Top Hat, when I was at NIMI, was to first help them raise capital. And so I've taken probably 1,000 investor meetings, spent months on planes, and realized just how unfair it is for a lot of people to be able to kind of break in. And then I've seen the downsides of giving up equity in your company. And so that was a big part of the motivation was, how do we help founders, get access to the capital they need so they can just focus on building their business.
I mean, that sounds awesome, but was it always this?
It was
like, did you and Michelle sit around the kitchen table and say, we need to democratize fundraising and it's so unfair, entrepreneurs and how they raise money and give up equity? Or how did it really start?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was an evolution, right? I think the idea was always there was this explosion of people who wanted to work for themselves, right? And it was enabled by sort of these online marketplaces. And so we had this, we really started focusing on the gig economy and like, hey, financial services are not well designed for the gig economy, and we can rebuild them. And so we got a deal with Uber in the early days, which was great. We were able to fund Uber drivers. Pretty quickly realized that Uber drivers don't really behave like businesses, because they can only, they're not capital constrained, right? They're really just sort of time constrained. Yeah.
So if I saw your original pitch, what would it have been?
It was probably a bank for the new economy. I think that was actually the title, was banking for the new economy. And you
started with Uber drivers.
Started with Uber drivers. We launched a product for Airbnb hosts and home away, so vacation rental business, like property managers. Those actually have some scale to them, so you could actually like open 2 or 3 properties and like our friend in the audience, like run a underground hotel that irritates people's neighbors. But that business only had a certain amount of scale and the data wasn't quite there. And then I think Michelle's been on Dragon's Den for a few seasons and started to see a lot of these pitches for e-commerce businesses. And I had been angel investing and started to see a lot of pitches for companies that I didn't know if I could fund, but I wanted to be able to help, and I didn't know if there would be an exit for them. And so we started to point our product towards these e-commerce founders and these online businesses. But honestly, man, if we hadn't started by giving $10 and $20 to Uber drivers, 4 years ago, we would never be able to give millions of dollars to an e-commerce entrepreneur, because we're using all the same technology, the same infrastructure, the same rails that we had built. So
you've really built a couple businesses here,
yeah.
Right? Subsequently learning, building off of them. Does it feel different this time? Like, does the demand and the fit feel different from when you were serving Uber drivers to when you're serving Airbnb hosts to today when you're serving sort of scaling e-commerce startups?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels closer, right? I think there is this huge global explosion of online entrepreneurs and e-commerce businesses, but it's certainly not where we're stopping, right? I think that's, we want to look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, hey, if this is no longer the market for us, we're going to continue to iterate. And if our goal is to help entrepreneurs and help founders, we're going to find where they need our help. And so, we've launched other products and we're continuing to test new frontiers. So it's not, we're not like, hey, let's sit back and ride the wave.
Out of curiosity, are there any clients who have used your Uber, Airbnb, and e-commerce product?
We do have one. I mean, this is what really happened was we had Uber drivers that were running Airbnb properties. I'm like, hey, can I use this? And we had Airbnb customers who were running e-commerce business on the side. And they're like, oh, can we? So a lot of it is just being pulled by the customers. And so
I want to invest in that client's business. That's a resourceful entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And so now that things are starting to work, it's directionally correct, you're getting excited about it. What are the challenges today? Like when you think of the biggest challenge that faces Clearbanc in deploying $1 billion of capital to scaling entrepreneurs, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, what I spend most of my time on, is thinking about like, how do we have this this really interesting team, right? So we have our company is built kind of, we call it like by founders for founders. If you ask anybody on the team, ask anybody who put their hand up, put your hand up one more time, Clearbanc folks. So ask them about their founder story, because everybody on the team has a founder story. They've either started a business, they have plans to start a business, they come from an entrepreneurial family, but they've got some thread in them. And so we have a very entrepreneurial team. And I think one of the challenges is we're 160 people now. How do we scale that? How do we get everybody to sort of point in the same direction while we're trying to launch 10 new countries?
Can I audit your entrepreneurial claim?
Yeah, please.
Put your hands up. Who was it? Put your hands up. Clearbanc. Okay. So we got someone here.
All right.
Okay. So he said that you're an entrepreneur. Do you want to tell us about your entrepreneurial journey?
I started a food safety tool for food manufacturers that focuses on looking at food allergies, food allergy ingredients.
And you do this at the same time that you work at Clearbanc?
No, this was before Clearbanc.
Unbelievable. I think it checks out. Give her a round of applause.
Yeah, that's Miriam.
Miriam, you're coming up to the Fireside chat next.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And look, I think this is one of the things that we've sort of just leaned into. I don't exactly know how it happened, but we just looked at like the best people on the team, and they were all entrepreneurs. And now, like, if you remember at McKinsey, they when they were recruiting, they didn't even tell me what my job was going to be. They just told me what I would do in 2 years, right? They were literally like, oh, come here for 2 years, you do some hard work and some shit, and then you'll go off and do all these amazing things. And so now we basically tell people, we're like, look, if you want to start a company at some point, but you don't have your co-founder, you have your idea, whatever, you don't have enough savings, come to Clearbanc, right? Talk to founders, build products for founders every day. And whenever you're, maybe even be a co-founder here and leave, and we'll fund you. Right?
What I love about that value prop is that it flips it on its head. I think about my time at McKinsey and I think, geez, I would have paid them tuition to go work there. And I think what you're trying to build, if I understand it correctly, is, hey, how would I pay Clearbanc to work there? Like, that's how good my education's going to be and where I'm going to be in 2 years. And that's a pretty powerful thing. I try to do it with my companies as well. It's not easy. So that's a good challenge to work on.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's fun. And I think getting this entrepreneurial energy all sort of pointed in the same direction where people still feel that autonomy and ownership, but it's not total chaos, which it's sometimes total chaos.
It's usually total chaos.
Yeah.
Speaking of total chaos, I'm curious, how do you handle the chaos? When you think about, the work-life balance that a founder needs to have, is it crazy for you, or have you found your zen?
Yeah, I mean, I think of work-life balance, like, I think as a founder, you almost have to zoom out a little bit. So in any given day, it's almost impossible to have balance, right? For it to be like, okay, I have 8 hours of work and I have I exercise and eat well and cook dinner and meditate and whatever and get 8 hours of sleep. Like that, that is almost impossible if you're trying to do anything really, meaningful. But if you zoom out to like a quarter or a year, I'm like, oh yeah, I took a trip to Spain and I relaxed I went sailing this weekend and I got to play soccer and basketball. And like, I don't do that every week and I don't do that every day, but over time I sort of say, okay, I'm pushing the pedal on the gas and I'm in sprint mode. And then like I can relax and I can reflect and figure out when I'm going to need to go for the next sprint.
One of the things that strikes me about this is that when you come home from a day of work, you go home to your co-founder.
I do.
And I think of when you turn off your work life, you can go home and, my wife of 7 years tonight, again, thank you for spending my anniversary with me.
Appreciate it.
She doesn't have the ins and outs and ups and downs that I have at the office. So how do you handle that in your relationship outside of work?
Yeah, so this has been fun. I mean, this is probably like one of the biggest risks, but biggest sort of upsides of starting a company with Michelle. We'd been dating about a year when we started Clearbanc, and it was before all the Dragon's Den stuff. So that's been an interesting thing to see, like that whole thing evolve. But it was, I think one of the interesting things is we're on the same wavelength, right? So if shit is hitting the fan at work, I'm not trying to pretend like I'm having a nice dinner and I can be present. We're just like, let's just solve this problem. And when it's not, we can both be sort of present with each other. We can travel together and we can, so like we wrote our Series B pitch deck, like on vacation in Napa, but it was great.
How romantic.
And like, so I think one of the things we've realized is like we would by default spend 24/7, 365 together. So we actually have to schedule time and like trips and time with other people so that we don't like drive each other crazy. But for the most part, like we never, like we always sort of work through solving problems. We never have to, like, most problems just we iterate so quickly because we can just bounce stuff off each other.
Do you ever go home and try to finally have a night off and then flip on the TV and then see Michelle talking to you about business?
Not yet, but that would, yeah. That would.
You know, you also strike me as being a product of some amazing communities, you know, University of Waterloo, some really incredible employers, all the people that you met down in the Valley. When you think about the importance that the community played in your career, how do you think about how you want to engage with the community? What do you do to sort of give back and make sure you're encouraging and mentoring for the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, one of the things that I try and do, like, love doing events like this. We host a bunch of events at the office as well. Started to be an angel investor. It was interesting because angel investing sort of happened by accident. I was helping founders raise capital. I was helping my friends raise money from folks that I'd known in the Valley, and just realized I could invest alongside them. The first one I did was Instacart, and I didn't actually invest. I didn't realize I could invest because I thought you had to have like this multi-million-dollar exit before you could write an angel check.
Whoops.
That was a miss. But then the next one was Street Context, which was pretty good. Yeah. And then Wealth Simple and Tulip. And so I've had a few, and it's always been friends and gotten, you know, when they've been starting companies, just helping them. And so, you know, writing small checks alongside them and being supportive has been a good way to stay connected and involved.
That's awesome. You have a great group of friends. I'm happy to be part of it, and I'd love to help you expand it. So now we're gonna turn to the audience and find Andrew some new friends, maybe even some leads for his next angel investment.
Great.
So let's get our runners up, and let's take some questions from the audience. What kind of process do you go through?
When you want to invest, what kind of process do you go to when you want to invest in a company? Like, what do you look for, future growth, or what kind of things do you go through when you?
Yeah. So I have like an atypical answer because it's almost always like a close friend of mine that I've known for a long time. So when I'm making a personal like equity investment, it's been like somebody that I've known for a long time. Almost doesn't really matter what they're doing because it's like somebody that I would invest in regardless of what they're doing because their idea will almost always, you know, pivot and evolve.
Bank for Uber drivers.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's our personal. That's how I make my personal angel investments. So
and when you're doing Clearbanc, you just check out somebody's like Experian credit report.
All
right?
just your personal credit report. No. Well, look, this is a big part of, I would meet all of these great founders and people that were looking to raise money. Most of them probably shouldn't be raising equity, right? And I was like, hey, love your business, love you as an entrepreneur, want to be able to help you. I haven't known you for long enough to be able to really understand. I don't know your industry well enough, but I want to be able to fund you. And so what we try and do is say, all right, we'll just use your business data, connect your online accounts, your ad accounts, your payment processors, your whatever online accounts you use to run your business, we'll ingest that data and make a decision and fund you instantly. And if it's working, we'll continue to fund you and help you keep more of your company. And so that's a big focus of ours.
So if I understand, you're skirting the entire traditional method of credit scoring or assessing the risk of a scaling e-commerce business.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I think if whether you paid your phone bill on time doesn't make you it has no implication on whether you're a good entrepreneur and whether you should be able to raise capital. And so what we're trying to do is just give founders another option so that they're not, I think for all of history, right? If you think back to like medieval times, the people with the capital always decided what got built, right? What roads, what castles, what projects, what companies got built. What we're trying to do is say, like, let's just flip the equation. Let's say the people that are taking the risk, that are building stuff, that are creative, are the people that are, scarce. And capital is kind of a commodity. So why don't we just try and commoditize it faster, give the founders more options, and let them choose how they want to run their business?
Today, when capital is plentiful.
That's right. That's right.
Some more questions.
Hey, Andrew, good to see you again.
Hey, man.
Me and Andrew are old friends at Top Hat. But more questions about, your original idea about starting an Uber and funding that startup. How did you pivot? Where were you at? What stage? What was the failing signs that you had to pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I think our mission had always been to like help entrepreneurs, right? And like we call them like freelancers, self-employed, but people that were like really trying to build a business and really trying to like work for themselves. And I think one thing we realized was like, we had this vision around this gig economy being like all of these like freelanced entrepreneurs that were working for themselves. And as we started to dig into it, we just found that like Uber drivers, weren't really built, like didn't operate like businesses. You can inject capital into a business and the business can scale and the business can grow and the entrepreneur can be sort of set for life and pay for their family and things like that. Uber drivers were much more like a stopgap. Like it's not, they were like, hey, I'm between jobs. I'm thinking about doing something else, but nobody really thought about like building. You can't drive 2 cars and things. So I think one of the things that we realized was like, this is not exactly the lifestyle that we like. We're not trying to help people build an Uber empire or like build a generational sort of like Uber business. But it did allow us to actually build a lot of the infrastructure. We helped Uber to design their driver side API, which they launched. We were able to move money very quickly. We had to make decisions very quickly because we were talking about like tens of dollars that we had to move. And so all of that infrastructure still exists today. But we just sort of started to look at like, hey, where are we really sort of mission aligned, where we really want to help sort of change some structural things in the world, and started to look for more of those opportunities.
Good evening, Jason and Andrew. It's nice to see that fellow management consultants doing so well in the startup ecosystem.
Says the guy wearing a suit and tie.
I have a question for you. How do you see the state of the union in the B2B space? I personally think that space is a little bit lagging behind in terms of benefiting from the talent and capital in the startup space. And what are the technologies that you see emerging in that space?
You want to take it? You want me to take it? So look, I think so. One of the things we're focused on now is we're looking at launching into the B2B SaaS space as well. We've got a few customers. We're starting to pilot, funding B2B SaaS. I actually think in Toronto there's a probably more developed B2B ecosystem than there is consumer. I think consumer is actually a bit newer. There's actually been like a long history of B2B SaaS and enterprise and SMB focused companies, and so I don't think that that we're that far behind. I do think that the quality of products, because the buyer is not the user, right? So you're always going to end up with a different quality of product when you're selling to a CFO or a procurement department, but your end users end up being the people that are using the products, which is why I think like some of these user-generated B2B SaaS products like the Slacks and stuff like that are starting to do better. But overall, I mean, I don't think we're that far behind from industry development standpoint.
What are some of the most important data-driven insights that you are interested in as you're making decisions and trying to like inform decisions around some of the future products that you're developing?
Yeah, really good question. So look, I think part of our goal is to like sort of commoditize capital, right? And so if we're just capital, we're commoditizing ourselves. And so I think one of the things that we're starting to realize is we sit in a really interesting position where we can actually figure out what's working and what the next step should be. I think building a company is a pretty lonely effort. And we're lucky to be in Toronto where there's, in this community where there's a lot of other founders, but we've funded entrepreneurs in 48 states in the US. Many of those founders they don't know any other entrepreneurs. And so they don't have anybody to go to and be like, hey, what do I do next? Like, what mistakes can I avoid making next? Where should I spend my next dollar? What bets should I run? What experiment should I run? And so we can help be that sort of like guidance for them, right? And that sounding board. And that's what a lot of people go to, VC investors for, is this promise of like some guidance. But VCs, most VCs, they've never been in those shoes and they can't really help and they don't have the time to help. And so they don't always deliver on that promise. We think we can do that in a scaled way. And so that's a big part of our focus is how do we actually help these founders, how do we help them win, and how do we use the technology and data and insights that we have to help them do that at scale?
With great power comes great responsibility, though, right? If you have the data to be able to make those kinds of recommendations, people are trusting you with very confidential, very proprietary insights about each of their business. How do you handle not just the security element, but giving insights in a way that don't compromise anybody's competitive advantage or unique insights?
Yeah, no, it's something that we think a lot about, right? Is this idea of being able to abstract away insights, and it's not just it's not just the data from our customers. We get a lot of data from partners, we get a lot of data from the ecosystem, and we run our own set of experiments. And so, what we're trying to do is really sort of, correlate this data, bring it all together, and then de-risk those experiments. So what we can do is we can basically say, look, if we were in your shoes, here are the next 5 things that I would try. And we can help de-risk that because you're using our capital to try them in most cases. And so that's sort of the positioning. But yeah, we're very, we are never we're never going to sell your data. We're never going to sort of like flip it and disclose it, tell a competitor. We're effectively putting the control of the data in the customer's hands, but also helping them use the data to make personalized recommendations. So it's not just reading a blog post of like, here are the 5 things to do as an e-commerce company, but it's like, no, for a company in your space, of your size, here are the things that'll work.
I hear that Toby runs his own secret sock store on Shopify. Do you guys run any of your own secret e-commerce stores for your own insights?
Well, we have a lot of folks. I actually have some Clearbanc socks I'm wearing too.
No wonder Toby's doing so well.
Toby's doing so well.
Find those custom Clearbanc socks off of his secret Shopify store.
Exactly. We have. A lot of our team have. I should get you some socks. I'll send you some socks.
I'll take those custom fly knits. Actually,
yeah.
Day one.
That's right. Every day is day one. He's got.
Oh, they're socks. They're just short.
So look, I was saying we have a lot of founders on the team, right? And a lot of them are running their own e-commerce business, their own stores, and so they eat the dog food of the company and the product, and we get that feedback. And so it's a big part of how we continue to stay connected and real to our customers.
How much time do we have for questions? We can take 2 more questions.
Hi, Andrew. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I forgot your name. Shoot.
Jason.
Yes, Jason. Hi, Jason.
I'm just the other guy up here. I get it.
No.
My beard's not as nice.
I had your name in my mind, but when I jumped out, I forgot at the spot.
Story of my life. I get called Alex all the time.
Me too.
So Jason, I think you mentioned at some point you said you would even pay to get to work in Mckinsey. And I know, Andrew, you worked at Mckinsey too. I was wondering if you guys can share something you've learned over the years there.
You go ahead, man.
Yeah. Well, I really learned an entire curriculum of things. When I think back to the stories that really impacted me, I think about my first day, my first project, where my manager said, hey, our client wants to do some mine development. They wanted to actually dig mines in South America, but they've never been to South America before and don't know who can do it for them. Could you generate a list of general contractors that could dig mines for them? And I said, yes. And over the next week, I just took the corporate credit card. I paid for a translator to sit beside me. We did some internet research, and we created a list of companies that would do a multi-billion-dollar mine development for the client. And I was able to come back on Friday to the manager and say, here's a list. And he said, thanks. And I thought that was cool. Like, there was no way to do the work. I was allowed and empowered to figure it out the way I wanted, and the expectation was just that it would get done. And so I thought that was a really powerful lesson that I had to teach myself, and I still would have paid for someone to teach it to me.
Yeah, I think that that's a good sort of insight into. For me, it was this idea that like it doesn't matter how big and famous any of these companies are. You'd meet the CEOs of all these companies. And it was the same thing that I shared when I first went to Silicon Valley and I saw all these companies going through these pivots. You read about them and they seem like they've got it all figured out, but in reality, they're still sort of feeling in the dark, right? And I think that's one of the things that's given me, a lot of confidence as a CEO is if I got the right team and we know the right way of working together and we can like trust each other and figure things out and move fast, we will figure out the market. We'll figure out competitors. We'll figure out sort of if there's a recession and macro effects and all these other things, we will bounce around and we'll respond. But if you get the people right, most of the rest of it's, figures itself out. And then you can write the book around how great of a strategist you were later. But most people, Fortune 100 CEOs to famous startup founders, to like Silicon Valley VCs, they don't really have it figured out, right? And I think
can't wait for the book, Andrew.
Yeah, this is I'm gonna get you to write the foreword.
Oh, man. Yes, our last question of the evening.
Hi, Andrew. My name is San. My question is, I was looking at purchasing companies, small to medium businesses, and I was looking from the buy side. One of the hardest things when you're looking at private companies is that you don't always know the financial health of the companies just by looking at the numbers. Even if you have great numbers, you don't know you just have to take a guess. So it seems to me like you probably will have a lot of data going forward about how a certain type of business would do for a person like me who is on the buy side. And not just me, actually, I was looking at some of the businesses. They're coming to the market too late. They are already running into cash flow problems. They're already running into crunch, and then they're coming to market to sell. By the time it's too late and they're not getting the valuation. So I think it would really help for the buy side and also sell side for a platform like yours to tell me how the company is or how the sector is.
Clearbanc as a service.
There we go.
Set of APIs to help buy side make decisions.
That could be a future. No, I mean, look, I think one of the things that, what we've tried to do is stay focused on companies within a certain vertical and business model, so we could actually start to understand the drivers of growth and the drivers of sort of economic health in those businesses. If we were looking at a wide variety of businesses in different industries, it would be much harder. The other thing that we really focus on is understanding where they're spending the capital, and if they're spending the capital on growth drivers, on things that we know work for businesses like that, then we feel a lot more confident, which is a big part of the reason why we've structured our product in the way that it is. But look, it's always difficult, right? And I think until very recently, you sort of had to take the company's pitch deck and financial models at face value. One of the things we've tried to do is get to a level of depth where we're looking at system of record data, we're looking at payment processors and banking data and ad platform data. So we're actually looking at the things that they run their business on, not sort of the rosiest version that they put into their models. So it's helped, but by no means are we done, and by no means is it perfect.
Unbelievable. Can you please join me in a huge round of applause to thank Andrew for sharing his time, his talent, his insights. Come here.